The new channel. The new channel. Hashtag TNC Now.
The views, opinions, and insights expressed in the following shows are those of the host, producers, guests, and viewers. They do not necessarily reflect the position of the channel. Viewer discretion is advised.
Hello and welcome to the new channel. Our passion transforms a community that sees all things new. I'm Alpha Sanford and I'm streaming live from Boston, Massachusetts. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, mabuhay. Welcome to Once a Teacher, Always a Teacher on the new channel. Hi again, it's Alpha Sanford on this beautiful Saturday morning. Can you believe it? It's here in Massachusetts. It's the third week of being in school, and I am excited to see all of you this morning. So, this topic that we're having today is very, very important. For those of you who don't really know yet about microaggression, this is your chance to really know what is it all about. You probably have heard about it, you've read about it, but what is it truly about? So today I am bringing you a wonderful guest who is an expert on this topic. Let me give you a little bit background in terms of our guest speaker for today. Our guest speaker, Miss India Barrows, is the SEAM Education Collaborative Coordinator of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. Miss India Barrows holds a Master of Education degree with a concentration in higher education from Merrimack College and has worked since 2017 as both the Assistant Director and Director of Diversity and Inclusion at New England College. In this role, she has served as a consultant to staff, faculty, and students through creating programming and training opportunities that support broadening diversity and inclusion. So, without further ado, let us bring in Miss India Barrows. India?
Hello.
Hi, India. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
Pretty good. So, first and foremost, I want to thank you for being with us this morning. Thank you for agreeing to be with us because I know that a lot of our viewers have been wanting to learn and clarify what is microaggressions. Yeah, so thank you for that. So tell us, how have you been since the start of this school year?
I've been good. It's been really busy. This is my first day of school and the whole training over the summer because last year I started in September, so after the first day of school. So I think that was really great to get to see the full experience this time around. So yeah, but I've been busy in a good way.
Yeah, I bet you've been busy, especially when it comes to training on diversity,
Yes.
equity, and inclusion. We need folks like you. So thank you for the work that you do.
Thank
All
you.
right. So our topic for today is really about microaggressions. But before we go into the full theme of things, let's start first with how do you define the word microaggression?
So a part of my role is a lot of work is focused on racial equity. So sometimes the language I'll use today will be really race centered, but I also want to uplift that there's intersections in identity around gender and sexuality. So if I say that, sometimes swap things out. But my definition of microaggressions are brief and everyday slights, insults, indignities that are sent by people. I don't always say well intentioned because some people are not always well intentioned, but some people will define it as well intentioned people. But they're unaware of the hidden messages that they're communicating to people. So an example is saying, like, oh, you're so articulate to a Black person. There's lots of implications to that, or an unspoken assumption that a Black person wouldn't be articulate. So that's how I define it.
Wonderful. Can I just clarify in terms of what you had mentioned?
Mhm.
The word articulate. So, for people like myself, um, I've heard it many, many times. In a recent conversation with another person of color, this person of color had mentioned to me, but Alpha, shouldn't I take that as a compliment when somebody tells me that I'm articulate? So, what do you think in terms of that situation?
I think oftentimes with microaggressions, because they can be often so subtle, it's a personal feeling that someone can come to that conclusion of like, oh, that did offend me, or that made me feel some type of way. And I also know in my own experience, as I've grown and matured and learned more about the world and more about these concepts, things that I thought were acceptable 10 years ago, I've now learned like, oh my God, maybe that was a little coded. There's a little bit of coded language in there that I didn't get at the time, especially when working with young people. A lot of times I have teachers share with me of like, I don't understand why this student is not offended by what the other students said. And it was like, it's not for you to determine whether it's offensive to that person, but one day they'll realize that it was offensive. So what can we do now so that behavior doesn't even happen in the first place? But it's definitely personal because there are things that people share with me that I don't realize are microaggressions all the time because we're all learning and growing. Um, and that just broadens my understanding.
That's right. That's right. Can you give us more examples of everyday microaggressions?
Like concrete examples or like break them down because we can
Um,
just.
you can share whatever you have in your mind, India. I think it's so broad, right? But whatever is coming to you right now that you think may be helpful to our viewers.
Sure. There are like micro assaults, and these are intentional. So this is that overt racism, that KKK throwing a brick through a window because it's an assault, right? Which I don't think is hard for us to always see. But then there's micro insults that are possibly unintentional acts of racism or sexism or homophobia or transphobia that deliver a hidden message. So that articulate that, oh, you're so pretty for a dark skinned girl, or like, oh, you're so pretty for a fat girl. Like, oh, because if she's fat or if she's dark skinned, there's no way that she can also be pretty. I also consider that code, like policing language and tone, because a lot of cultures have, well, every culture has a different norm for how they communicate and what's considered insulting and what's not. And just because it's more comfortable for the dominant group, which in our society, in American society, is white people, just because it's more comfortable for white people to receive and give feedback in a certain way doesn't make it the right way. And trying to police people into communicating in the way that maintains their comfort can be incredibly harmful over time. And then there's micro invalidations that diminish lived realities of people of color and other marginalized identities. So when someone is sharing with you their experience, maybe even personally, my experience with you or my experience with this system or this, or I don't like going to that store because I always get followed. And that person receives it and says, oh, that's not true. I never get followed. Yeah, girl, because you're white. Or
That's right.
like, and that's okay too, because that's their lived experience, but don't invalidate someone else's in the process.
That's right. I just wanted to share with you something that happened to me about 3 years ago or so, in the same lines as being followed. One day, right, I was at a bank, and it was a very cold winter day, and there's a foyer, and a person was already inside the ATM back machine. And it's a very, very cold day. And in my experience, as long as you keep a distance at least 6 feet away from the ATM, and you don't really see what's going on in front or on the screen on the ATM, then you're fine, right? So this person was like, excuse me, why are you here? And I'm like, I'm here because, I'm supposed to take money from the ATM machine. And so the conversation went on to the extent that the other person, who is white, was like, I'm really feeling uncomfortable right now. And I was like, why are you feeling uncomfortable? Is it because, I'm a person of color and a person who doesn't really look like you? And she just kept on saying, could you please, could you please? And I kept on saying, it's very cold outside. And typically, this is where I usually stand. I wait inside the foyer for my turn. I'm not doing anything. But you could see, or at least I could see at that moment, that the other person was really uncomfortable with having somebody, probably someone that she has not quite seen in a while in the community. And yeah, she's feeling the fear and the discomfort of being around somebody of color in the bank.
And that's why oftentimes when I do trainings when people ask me, hey, can we do a training on microaggressions? I often partner it with implicit bias. Because if folks are not unlearning or recognizing that instantaneous reaction that they have when they see someone, they don't even realize that there's a neurological thing going on when they see someone that's different than them. How could they possibly recognize if and when they're committing microaggressions, right? So I don't think they could be separated. As I've like grown in my practice and talking about these things, of like, no, they need to be together, because they'll might say like, oh, like I didn't mean anything by it, like you were just a stranger that walked in. And it was like, but would you have reacted like that if it was someone of the same identity group as you? And the bad thing is not your first thought, because thoughts are internal and we can't necessarily control them. The bad thing is the action that followed. The harm was the action that followed. So if you're not figuring out that bias that you have inside, you're not going to realize when you're doing microaggressions.
That's right. I love how you pointed out that implicit bias and microaggressions really go hand in hand. Would you say that the implicit bias comes first and then the microaggression, because of the subtlety of it, like comes out natural sometimes as a joke?
Yeah, because I think implicit bias can be the inside thought. Microaggressions is the action that followed.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't just come out of nowhere,
Mm.
in my opinion.
Yeah. So for our viewers who are non-BIPOC, also our white viewers, what could be the things that they need to be more aware of in terms of their own implicit bias, or in general, about microaggressions?
I think people should have one of my superintendents calls this a curious mind. Um,
Yeah, I love it.
that's why I was like, let me cite my source. Um, and I think always asking yourself, why did I react this way? Why did I feel this way? And even doing some swapping out of identity groups of like, if this was a young Hispanic boy, would I have done this? Also consider skin tone. I think white people especially don't always consider skin tone either. I know we do as people of color, but I think that also impacts their perception of the world too. And I think really thinking about how your actions impact other people.
Mhm.
So I think most educators especially are empathetic people. They're in human services and want to help young people and be good people. And consider, what does it feel like to be constantly treated this way or receiving these micro invalidations, microaggressions, right? And really dig into that empathy. So when it gets hard for you, like, oh, I'm so tired of talking about this or doing that. But like, no, but the children and people of color in your circle and community are constantly, without choice, having to navigate spaces that they're picking and choosing if and when they're going to respond to these microaggressions. So really committing to, I don't want anyone that walks in my circle or in my life having to do that around me. So what do I need to do?
That's right. That's right. India. I'm just thinking right now. Some of the questions that has come up to me are questions such as, "Where'd you come from? Where you come from?" Right? What do you think of that phrase?
I think it's a microaggression.
Tell it. Say it loud, please.
It's a microaggression, especially depending on who it's coming from. If
Okay.
we have an established relationship, if I'm in line at the grocery store and you see me and you like my hair, which happens to me quite often. This is not my real hair. This is my fancy hair, guys. But like the real hair is like big and curly.
Right.
They're like, "Oh, I love your hair. Where are you from?" And I'm like, "That's weird. You just say you like my hair. Like, like you wouldn't have asked that of anyone, of a non-black person who
Mm-hmm.
likes their blowout. Like, you
Mm-hmm.
just wouldn't ask that." And you have to also consider how this happens every single time someone leaves the house.
Right.
And
Right.
it is not someone's responsibility to be teaching you all the time. So I hope
Right.
that answers your question.
Yeah. So, what could people who may not be aware of this simple microaggression do so that they will not commit saying these questions or doing these things that may subtly hurt the feelings of other people? What would they do? What should they do?
I think first they should tap into themselves and figure out, has there ever been a time that I felt that this has happened to me? I say that is with women especially, because there's women in every group.
Right?
And asking women, like, has there been a time that you feel that your gender was the implied in whatever response or conversation you were having? And getting tapped into if and when that has happened to you helps you be like, oh, so that's what that was. And now you can see it more either in your own life or in people around you. And then I think it also needs to be partnered with relationship building. If you don't know anyone that doesn't look like you, if you don't hang out with people that don't look like you or believe in different religions than you, right? I'm not talking like drastic moral differences, but like people who are a little bit different than you, you're just going to continue perpetuating these things. And I always say in my trainings, my goal for my participants is that I hope that you have someone who doesn't look like you that is such a good friend that they can open your refrigerator when they come to your house. Because that's a different level of intimacy and comfort and type of relationship. Not everybody can just open your fridge.
Right.
That's the type of relationships you have to build. And when you have relationships with people who are different than you, they will feel comfortable to share, like, ooh, don't say things like that. Like, we don't say that anymore. Like, that was really offensive. Like, you're going to get canceled or whatever. Like, so it needs to be introspection and relationships partnered with that education piece on YouTube and all these things, and watching trainings and going to trainings. You can't PD your way out of it. It needs to be a part of your life. So introspection, relationship building, and education. I gotta coin that. Look at me.
Oh, I love that. Education, introspection, and is it training?
Education, introspection, and relationship building.
Relationship building. Yeah. I love that actually. And the fact
Write it down.
we gotta have to write it down. Yeah. I love it so much, especially when you said about, the analogy of having somebody being able to open up your refrigerator at home. So if you don't really quite have that relationship with that person, maybe, we're going to have to step back and be more sensitive when it comes to our choice of words, when we are in choice of actions, when we are interacting with people who may not be familiar or as familiar as with some of other friends, right?
Yeah.
All right. India, I'm curious. Was there ever a moment in your DEI life when you realized how microaggressions have affected you?
Yes.
Okay.
When I first started my career, like my research and my passion is in race, right? You could ask my mom. My first report was on Harriet Tubman in like second grade. I handed it in 3 weeks early. Like this is all I've ever cared about my whole life. And it wasn't until I started my career that I realized that my gender played a role in how I'm perceived. And I was like, what the hell? Like, I know they're not, I know this person isn't like racist or anything. So I was like, is it because I'm a woman? And it was like this crazy aha moment. And I was like, wow, like this is nuts. And I've never had to consciously had to navigate this space. And that was really, really hard in my first couple years of my career. Was actually my gender more than my race.
Wow.
Yeah.
What was there any phrases that are sticking to you right now that our viewers could learn from?
I think the biggest one for me is being interrupted in a meeting, spoken over, and then when you make room for yourself, because I can be quite assertive, then they like take your ideas and like rephrase what you just said 20 minutes ago. And then everyone else in the room, except the women, most of the women are looking around like, oh, great job, great job. And I'm like, I said that 20 minutes ago and I had to scream from the mountaintops to even be heard. And what I want also is a little bit of allyship in those times too. For if you see someone experiencing those, check in with that person. Be like, oh, do you want me to say something? Because I'll tell him to stop interrupting. Like, there's the line to toe between like speaking for somebody. And like you said, what if they don't realize that this should be offensive or whatever, right? But check in with that person of like, girl, I saw that he was talking over you. You want me to say something next time or speak up? I think also on the other side of this is speaking up when you notice somebody else is doing a microaggression.
I love those. I really love those, India. Which brings me to the term mansplaining. Tell us your thoughts regarding mansplaining.
I really was like, oh, that doesn't happen to me. Like until it happened to me. And it really, it grinds my gears. And it's a man explaining, male presenting person too, a man explaining something that I already know, or you would already know. So it's almost like a man explaining childbirth to a woman or a person with a reproductive system. And it's like, sir, my mom has been telling me since I first menstruated. Like, I know. I've been in this body for a long time. Like, I know. Just explaining things that I would already know. Or in like professional spaces where we might even be on the same tier of the profession. So we are at the same level of expertise, and you're explaining to me something that I would already have to know to be able to do this job. And you're still explaining it to me.
Right.
So check yourself.
Yeah.
Ask, oh, do you know about blah, blah, blah? And then you're like, and the person can say, oh yeah, I know. Okay, great. And we move on.
I love that. Thank you, India. So in all your years as a leading DEI leader, how important it is to talk about microaggressions in public schools, particularly teachers in relationship to teaching students or teachers interacting on a daily basis with students?
I think it's so important because of how much time you spend with young people. For their first, from like 4 or 5 to 18, 17, 18, they spend the most amount of their time with you than anyone besides their classmates, right? And
Oh my, I think we just lost Miss India Barrows. So why don't we just take a quick break for now? And when we are back, we'll bring her back in. All right, we'll see you in a bit.
Juan Lu and his puppets face to face with special guests Makata Tawanan, Jess Box, and the Lunaria Marionette Show.
Salita. Alam mo, Tito Anlo, kung wala ako, magsasalita ka mag-isa. Kung wala ako, wala kang masusuot. Kung wala ako, wala kang nakakain.
November 13, Sunday, 7 p.m. at the La Verdad Auditorium in Apalit, Pampanga. Buy your tickets now and see you soon, face to face.
Hi, everybody. We're back. Thank you for still being with us. So why don't we bring back in Miss India Barrows? India?
Hello.
There you go. Hi. So we were talking about microaggressions in the public schools. So that's where we left off, and how important it is to talk about microaggressions in the public schools.
Yes. So like I was saying, I think our students spend so much time with us for such a huge amount of time in their development. And it's also, we want to make sure it's a space that they can be their full authentic selves and be present. We talk about mindfulness all the time nowadays. And that also pertains to young people. And they need to be able to be present in this space. And that requires them to be in a safe space that they're not constantly navigating and editing themselves in order to belong in this environment. And at the end of the day, we want our students to learn. And if our students are distracted, whether it be from hunger, if there's food insecurity, I think of it as the same as a racially safe space, or a place where they can be as safe to be themselves, where they're not distracted and they can just learn their fractions. And that's on the adults. And I often say in my trainings too, that I know when I was a young person in school, there were things that I allowed to happen to me that I didn't realize were harmful until my brain was done developing. So I say, you don't want to be the reason they're in therapy. You don't want to be the topic that they're talking about in therapy 10 years after graduation. So you might not see the harm right now. You might not see how it's impacting them now, because they're also navigating their own social hierarchies and systems as young people. But it's like the stock market. You put it in, and in 10 years, you get a return. So we don't want that for our kids, and we want them to learn. And as much safety and psychological and physical safety you can create for them, then they'll learn.
I love it, India. And it just struck me to my core in terms of what you said. You don't want to be the topic during therapy sessions or whatever counseling sessions or any other sessions that they may have with people processing like trauma, processing some negative things that happen to their lives. And as I was listening to you, I'm like, yep, a lot of the things that I talk with a few of my coaches has something to do with the experiences that are actually under the category of microaggressions, such as, the way that my words come out, and how people have commented in terms of, oh, can you please talk faster? Oh, Alpha, can you please talk slower? Oh, what? Can you say that again? Like squinting their eyes, you know. And for someone whose English is not their native language, that somehow, gets into me sometimes.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Because then over time, you start to believe it almost, even if
yeah.
you don't really believe it. Your body starts to believe it. I even think of that especially with like body, as in
Mhm.
young women and girls, of like every woman I know would be like, oh, if only I liked my body 10 years ago. We waste so much time because the world tells us that we're this, that, and the third. But do you believe that?
Yeah,
And that's really hard to do.
right. And if you are a teacher in front of your students, and you are unaware that you are saying these words,
Mhm.
again, what I love, what you said, you don't want to be the teacher or the person that's going to be talked about in a therapy session later on. Ooh,
Yep.
that's not going to be good, right? Yeah, you're supposed to be the one inspiring and motivating students, young people, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So, India, will you walk us through how to recognize, that's microaggressions, and what to do when you are confronted with microaggression?
In order to recognize microaggressions, it just takes practice and
Uh-huh.
experiencing different experiences than your own. So I always tell people listen to different types of podcasts than you normally listen to, because people of color is being very honest on social media and in podcasts and YouTube and all these other platforms. I say diversify the content that you're consuming. Watch different shows on TV and the streaming platforms, right? Read different books, not just like academic, boring books, but like
Mhm.
read books by different authors and
Mhm.
from different POVs. Because as your worldview broadens, you start to see, like, oh, I know if I was this fictional character in this book on based in Hindu mythology, like that would be really insulting. So, like, maybe that was harmful. But especially, I think, for people in the dominant group in anyone's respective society, so in American society, that's white people, when they start to build that recognition, we need to also toe that line of allyship, like I said earlier. So check in with the person that you think was harmed or targeted by the microaggression before you just speak up for them to a certain extent. Obviously, if there's super overt harm, you need to speak up for somebody and make sure that they're not being harmed, right? But check
Mhm.
in with them and also tap into your humanity and look at that child's face.
Mhm.
I'm thinking for our little ones, our elementary kids, who might not always be, they're not at that self advocacy place just yet, right? But their faces tell it all and they don't lie necessarily.
Yeah.
um, and look at their faces and see if their face falls. See if
Mm.
their behavior changes throughout, especially in elementary where you're with them for the whole day pretty much. Check in and see, okay, it's like in the morning after Pledge of Allegiance, like I saw this treatment. I didn't really like, okay, let me see. And then I see them in the line and they usually sit next to each other and they're not. And he's now withdrawing from
Mm.
the class. Like, okay, let me check in with him. Hey, what happened? Like, and then do that repair.
Mhm.
I think we're really good as a society of raising that awareness now and having conversations, but where's the action? Where's the repair of the harm? Where's the acknowledgement of the harm? And then finding some sort of resolution to educate that young child or the teacher who did it, right? To not do it again.
Mhm. I love it. Yeah, especially when you mention how the face of the young children like melts.
Yep.
You know,
You can
something
see
is
it.
wrong. Yeah. Yeah, and they're very honest in terms of their emotions, and then their emotions are being expressed on their face or sometimes their behaviors.
Yep.
So, educators, I think that's a wonderful tip that we need to really be aware of.
Yeah.
India.
And like that, that's a perfect opportunity to not commit a micro invalidation.
Mm-hmm.
So when that child chooses to share with you, don't just say, "Oh, well, you know, he didn't mean it." No, like, it
Mm,
still hurt him. Like, so okay, would you like me to talk to to the person who did it? Would you like me to come with you to talk with them? Do you want me to do nothing? Like, what do you want to get done? Don't just say, "Oh, he didn't mean it." We
mm,
also always talk about intent over impact.
mm-hmm.
Um, and okay, maybe they didn't mean it, but it still hurt. So like, don't invalidate um, that child's experience.
Let's explain further, India, the intent versus impact
Hmm.
to our viewers who may not understand those two concepts.
Yeah. So intent is obviously your intention. Why I wanted them to feel supported, or like, oh, that's your best friend. Like I would never do anything to harm you. But when you said your words, the output, what was received by the listener, was, ooh, I didn't like that. That hurt me. Or no, it's not landing like you think it's landing. So you might really think, oh, like I really wanted you to feel valued or loved or hear what I'm saying, but in the process, um, the message that was received, the impact, was not in alignment with your intent.
Mm-hmm.
People need to be responsible for the impact of their words and actions, and still like their intent as well. But like sometimes they're not in alignment. Or they're misunderstood or not said properly. So we have to take accountability for that impact.
That's right. Yeah. Somehow, what's coming to me right now is one of the phrases that I read in one of the many books that I switch back and forth on a weekly basis. And in one of the books, it said that if it's impactful, then it's true. And it's also sometimes it's hurtful. And if it's hurtful to you, then it means um, it's true to you,
Mm.
right? So let's talk about at a national level, India. Why is microaggression an issue? And to your knowledge, what is happening at a national level that is making a lot of people, not just people in the education field, but the general public, being more aware of the ramifications of microaggressions?
I think the stakes are a lot higher for people, um, and the threshold for racism and homophobia and transphobia is not the same as it was even 5 years ago in our
Mhm.
society. And whether you think that's a good or bad thing, that could be a whole nother conversation. But as we become a more globalized world, but smaller because of the internet, and we can communicate across oceans now in seconds, we have to be more mindful of all the people that are getting impacted by the things that we do, the legislation that we put in place, the people that we elect, right?
Mhm.
And because we know policy, especially as educators, policy and laws affect us.
Yes.
And if there's laws and policies in place that usually were made to exclude certain types of people,
Mhm.
given the pattern of behavior in the United States, um, you have to be mindful. And that's why it matters who you vote for. It matters, and those people that are in office that maybe 20 years ago could say crazy things
Mhm.
are now considered insulting, and now there's ramifications for that. That maybe
Mhm.
20 years ago they would not have had to like run a real campaign or really have to fight for their jobs, because as a society we've evolved. And I think for our young people, there's a quote that I pulled from somewhere, I cannot remember, so sorry, but we cannot graduate another cohort of students who perpetuate racist systems and practices, because it's just not sustainable. They'll lose their jobs. They will harm people deeply. And as people of color and those of other marginalized identities have more and more access to bigger platforms and more spaces, you're not about to do that if your CEO is Black.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can't do what you used to do when Black people didn't have access to those spaces. And I just think like it truly harms people. And like, who wants to harm people? At the end of the day, a lot of these things harm people.
Yes.
And that's why they say Black Lives Matter, because if you don't recognize people who don't look like you as actual human beings who deserve human dignity and respect, nothing is going to change. So it's acknowledging that people who don't look like you are actual humans and deserves all the rights and access that you do.
Wow, that's powerful. Thank you, India. How about any curriculum, in the school system? We have a lot of different curriculum, lots of model, program, whatsoever, right?
Yeah.
Is there a model or curriculum to becoming more aware on microaggressions?
This question, this question grinds my gears sometimes. If it wasn't bad a day, because I think, especially in the work that I do, it is so human driven.
Yes.
There is no algorithm. There is no grid. There is not enough charts in the world to quantify the human experience. You have to live it. And that's what I want people to do, especially as educators who we love a checkbox and a B, C, 3 points in each. It's so complicated and you have to live it. A video I use, if anybody watches The Good Place, I use the video of explaining the timeline in the afterlife. Sorry, my dog is screaming.
That's okay.
Bruno, stop.
As long as we can hear you.
And it's so complex. There's no entry point. It is so complex, and you come back and do it again. And what I say is to really tap into your human experience. Bruno, stop. I'm so sorry. Now he has a shout out on the internet.
Hi,
Bruno. I think like you have to live and you have to commit to this in your personal and professional life. That's that introspection piece, like I talked about earlier, that you're not gonna PD your way out of this. You just have to live. And you have to look beyond your own lived experience and acknowledge that those around you have their own. And maybe that'll inform how you see the world as you grow.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're not gonna curriculum our way out of this.
Yeah.
It is a living experience, and you just have to commit to doing it.
Correct. Yeah. We have a term with the SEED program, the Seeking Educational Equity and Diversity, and we use the term the textbook of our lives. So we're not going to be using any other textbook. We're not going to be using any set curriculum, but we will use the textbooks of our lives. And that's what I'm hearing also from you when it comes to microaggression. We have to live it, right? And I love what you said. We cannot PD away, these microaggressions, topics around microaggressions. Yeah. Okay. Very good. Very good. So understanding microaggression at the educator's level, how would every educator try to begin to understand any solutions of microaggression to foster more inclusivity in their schools or in their classrooms? How would they begin to understand, I guess, the solutions in order to become more inclusive in their classrooms?
I think they need to look at who's in their room. right?
Okay.
And see, okay, who's all in here, and then see how that impacts. What books are we reading? How are we speaking to children? How are we picking on children? That's why there's tons of frameworks on how to manage a classroom, right? Or even not saying like, come on, boys and girls, not everyone's a boy and girl. Let's go, everybody. So using gender neutral language, that's the easiest one, I think, because like that doesn't require like someone calling you out or in, or however you like to say that. Using gender neutral language, looking at the pictures on your walls, looking at the books that you're reading, the names of characters, the types of people that you're studying in social studies, the scientists that you're studying in science. I even say real world applications at the higher levels, especially figuring out how does this certain topic interact with their real world, and then a neighborhood around them that's not the one that they're in, to broaden children's worldviews and also your own. So they're building that empathy development and consciousness of people that are different than them, and being a space where your students feel safe enough to be like, ooh, don't, oh my God, that was not good, Miss So-and-so. Can I say that again? And like, oh, okay, my bad, sorry, won't do it again. Creating that feedback loop where they know, oh, if I tell her that that was harmful, she won't do it again.
Right. India, thank you actually for bringing it to our attention regarding what still some educators use, like boys and girls. Hey guys,
Yep.
you know, so instead of saying those words, folks who are listening, please let's try to be more inclusive and use more gender neutral terms, such as what India said, everybody, hi everybody, or hi friends, or instead of hey guys, we can use hey folks, or the folks, good morning folks. Right? So thank you for pointing that out, because I think educators begin their day addressing everyone in their class. And if there is like a clear separation already, right? Like boys, girls, females, males, right away, there's that subtle message that there's separation instead of bringing them together as a whole.
Yep. And we never know what's going on internally for people. So especially at the lower levels, they got a lot, they're figuring out themselves, right? And as few messages as we can send them while they figure out how they identify, the better. So they feel safe and like, oh, I can be openly non-binary here, because like that's fine here. Instead of getting, oh no, I know I have to pick one. If I'm in this space in this school, I need to pick one.
Right. Yeah. Because at the end of the day, as educators, we got to make sure that our schools and our classrooms are not just safe, but we foster the sense of belongingness for everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, India, any last words or any inspirational message to educators who are listening or will be listening to this topic later on?
Amazing. It's so great that you brought up belonging, because that's what I would say.
Okay, please say more.
I've informally added belonging to my title, because I think without belonging, what's the point?
Yes.
What's the point of all this if our people do not feel like they belong in our schools? And I want to extend that to not just our students, but also our staff. If there's no sense of belonging and there's no sense of urgency to address these issues, to remedy these solutions, the cycles of oppression are going to keep happening. We can talk about it, but you got to be about it. And that is grounded in belonging. If our goal is every single person that walks through our doors can be their full authentic selves and come home safely, we did it.
Oh, that's a beautiful message, India. And where can our viewers get in touch with you, especially if they would want to dig more, because you just scratched the surface on microaggressions. Just a little scratch on it. But if any one of our educators or even education leaders out there would want to talk to you more about it, how can they get in touch with you?
They can email me. Maybe I'll get a social media now. This is my first like public appearance. Um,
Yay!
they can email me at my email.
All
It'll
right.
be. Can I
What's
type
your
it?
email?
The
I'll
email?
type it. Yeah.
It'll be. I should give you my professional email. It'll be consulting.barrows@gmail.com.
Okay. Consulting.barrows@gmail.com. Wonderful. Well, India, this has been an awesome morning with you talking about microaggressions. I hope that our viewers were able to learn a little bit more on the topic of microaggressions. But I'm sure if they want to dig deeper and go in depth about microaggressions and inclusivity, please make sure to get in touch with India Barrows at consulting.barrows@gmail.com. All right, India. Well, thank you so much for being with us today. And I'm very honored that this is your first time to be with us. So I'm leaving this show with such gratitude for India and for allowing us to share her wisdom to all of us. I learned a lot, and I hope you did too. All right, everybody. Thanks again for being with me and India. I will see you next week. Bye for now.